None to wipe my eyes, none to dry my tears. I alone in sorrow. I must go, I alone in sorrow. I must go. On whose backs we climb, the ancestors on whose backs we climb, and for whom we do everything to celebrate their struggles against enslavement. When I went to England in 1969, a school friend of mine, a woman, Althea Jones, Dr. Althea Jones LeCointe, was very much in the leadership of the London Black Panthers. And I joined. I was in all the marches and demonstrations around the prisons, the pigs, we're pigs, we got to get rid of the pigs. And when I came back, I just walked straight into the movement.
It was an exciting time for young people because there was a lot of movement, a lot of activity, a lot of new rhetoric that hadn't been heard before. You know, say it loud, we're black and we're proud, that kind of thing. We want our country, we want it now. Those were the sort of slogans that moved us in 1970. And we were, as young people, we were caught up in that movement.
Well, I had just turned 19 in the January of 1970.
I was 16, yeah.
I was in Form 3, so I would have been 15.
It was like a life-changing experience for all of us who were around at that time.
It was just about peaking at that age where you're wondering, what is life about? And I just actually resigned from one of the committees at the church because I was not satisfied with the work that they were doing in the community. I thought we'd be doing more tangible work among our people. And then came the demonstrations. And the first one we attended, my mom and I, we attended was the one to Shantytown, which is now Beetham Estate. And this is the first time I heard, well, became my husband afterwards, but our leaders speak. And while he was speaking, I said, this is what I want to do with my life.
The whole notion of power to the people was very much the basic thesis, that the basic idea that everybody latched on to, because there was the feeling that we were not getting, our worth as an independent country.
I always felt in the back of my mind that my lot in life was going to be relegated to X or Y or Z. It was not exponential. And I think during that time, what I was hearing and what I was seeing happening, it gave me hope that that exponential opportunity was there for me, like everybody else. And I think that's what drew me.
There were cataclysmic results, shifts in the consciousness of people and in the economics. For instance, no Black people worked in the banks before 70. And the first time I was called beautiful was in 70. The first time African people's clothes were not regarded as costumes. And natural hair and skin had its own beauty.
Well, before that, beauty was seen as through the eyes of the Caucasian, right? So, if you had to go out, if you had to go to a function, if you had to go to a wedding, you'd press your hair, and you just have it straightened, and you would wear a lot of makeup. And so 19th century was a strong cultural influence in that we started to reject those images, and embrace the image of the strong, proud Black woman.
What the Black Power movement did was that it forced people to see different ways of looking at things, to critique European civilizations, to acknowledge everyday racism, and also to identify aspects of racism in our everyday life that had not received as much attention. For example, it was during that period that you found greater acceptance of African clothing, which had not been so much part of movements before. I remember Amy Ashworth Garvey, the first wife of Marcus Garvey. She was very different in the way she always wore these huge kente cloth outfits, and she taught African. She had a great respect for things African. She was Jamaican, by the way. But that recognition of things African and that European ways were not the only ways, or not necessarily the best ways, was something I think was there, but not as much as after 1970.
When I came back to Trinidad in September 69, and end of my studies, and the whole movement was building up in Trinidad. A lot around what was happening in Sir George William University in Montreal. And there was that groundswell in the campus at St. Augustine that fed into eventually the formation of the National Joint Action Committee.
I became a member of the North Arm of the movement and made my mark, I believe, through my belief in the transformative power of culture. I was involved in things like the production of liberation, selling the liberation, doing the proselytizing, walking up and down through the hills of Laventille and so on. Being trained by Macandal Daga in public speaking and so on, working in the communities, and eventually becoming part of the leadership of the movement later on in the 70s.
I was part of the East Dry River Laventille arm. You had in San Fernando, you had Morvan, you had all over Tobago, you had all over the place. And therefore, we worked within those organizational districts.
There were a number of women who put themselves through things, made levels of sacrifice that a lot of big hardback men couldn't do.
Just seeing now, in my mind's eye, women walking, didn't have no big name. Up in the top of the society, it was always Macandal Daga. Well, Intu was a big name. I suppose my name was there somehow, sometimes, and so on. But it was a set of women in those communities working.
Women have held their own in every aspect of the revolution.
We were fully integrated into the struggle. We did everything the men did. It was a revolutionary movement. We were fully involved.
The people who carried flags, which would be at the head of the demonstrations, were women, soldiers. Many people did not know that the people were soldiers, and activists.
We shared every single task, from being involved in the military to producing the paper, to putting up posters, to speaking in rallies,
The pictures of the leadership under the banner do not reflect NJAC in that way.
Geddes Granger, later McCandle-Dagger, was the main leader. Other leaders around like Dave Dabo, Kafra Kambon, David Murray, Ayugoro Ome, well, these came out of the university. And you had others as well. But the leadership was primarily male.
Following the incidents that took place at the Sir George Williams University when NJAC decided to mobilize the country on behalf of the students in the United States.
At that time, the Canadian banks monopolized the financial sector in the country, the banking industry. We had the Royal Bank of Canada, Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, Bank of London and Montreal, Chase Manhattan.
There was a march. I think that was in March to Sao when Basil David died.
That funeral and the masses and masses and masses of people that attended, irrespective of what else was going to happen after the funeral, people said, it's almost like they said, you know what, we don't care. We're coming out and we are standing together because this has to stop.
There was a demonstration to central Trinidad, 12th of March, 1970. On the day that the state of emergency was declared in 1970, which was the 21st of April, 4 times Indian men and women assembled in central Trinidad intending to march into Port-au-Spain because the plan was that on that morning, the Indians would come up to Curepe Junction, where the Africans would meet them, and then jointly we would march into Port-au-Spain. The government was guaranteed to fall. There would have been a non-violent collapse of the government. I'm saying this without reservation. There would have been. But the Americans, the Venezuelans, sent arms, and the Americans surrounded Trinidad's waters. I don't know if you know that. They put battleships around there.
My mother went with me to the demonstrations, but then the police came in the morning of April 21st, and even before that, his friend who was then Dave Dabo, he lived in the next street from us when we were growing up, and he was quite close, was in and out of our home, and he was arrested. And then my mother started to backpedal because she said, my children may be arrested. It may reach to this. We have never been in this kind of situation, especially my brother who was involved in the leadership at the time.
I spent 6 months down on Nelson Island. It came out on the 23rd of October.
We both went down, my mom and I, to Nelson Island and so on, to meet him. And of course, we knew most of the people who were down there. And it was a real gathering, those kind of visits. They brought them, of course, to another island. And then we'll have our visits and interact with them and so on, yeah.
So the state of emergency came.
State of emergency was a horrific time for women in Trinidad and Tobago, I will tell you. Women were raped by people like the police and things like that, and it just went swept under the rug. I remember as a young girl being petrified of being outside after the hour because you heard about things that happened to young people, or to people, anybody, girls, young girls and guys, but I guess young women. I lived with my sister, and again, I was bouncing between the both sisters, and I just remember it being a very traumatic time because we had to be inside by a certain hour, and if you were caught outside, there was no telling what would be done to you, and there was no one was held accountable. The police were not held accountable for the things that they did, and the regiment, not just the police, the regiment as well. And there were some atrocious things done to many people, women, young girls and women, during the state of emergency that maybe that's one of the reasons people don't talk about it, because there were a lot of things happening during the state of emergency.
I remember during the state of emergency being in a particular place in an apartment on Duke Street, and the police come in for us, come in with the ambulance, so intent on were they on shooting and killing.
The police could knock on your door at any time, and you could be hauled off somewhere. It doesn't matter how old you were.
My involvement got deeper in that post-state of emergency, period, when all the leaders were detained.
With the first detention, which was in 1970, all the male leaders were in jail, barring 2. It was the women who ran the organization in those 7 or 8 months that we were imprisoned.
It was extremely hard keeping the organization together, keeping it going, because remember, we are under a lot of from the police, right? Harassment and so on. But also we had to see about people who were detained, their families who were outside, their wives and so on. And directly after, we started to do a lot of work within the communities. So those of us who were working, we'd leave work and head straight out. We'd have cars waiting and publications and whatever we needed, and we would head out, even to the country areas, and go door to door and group to group and continue our education.
I remember using Eric Roach's poem on Uriah Butler, our labor leader of the 30s, our revolutionary labor leader, who staged a strike and revolt in 1937. And we portrayed the burning of Charlie King, the policeman who was killed in 1937. And the police came to my mother's house the following night, Christmas Eve, and rampaged through it, about 12 of them in their filthy boots.
The Black Power movement was also taking place at the same time as the women's liberation movement. And there were often debates about whether, first of all, Black women needed women's liberation, first of all. Secondly, whether Black women could afford women's liberation when they had other more important things to deal with. And then the whole question of how women were treated within the organization. And of course, there's a lot that could be said about that. Angela Davis wrote in her book, Women, Race and Class, was it that? About the challenges that she experienced in the US. But I think there were similar challenges here because many revolutionary movements, in a way, they are organized around a very machistic kind of ideal. They call for confrontation, they call for speaking loudly, they call for men calling out other men, and there's a lot of masculinities confronting each other. And within that kind of confrontation, the whole location of women in that movement is always an issue of debate.
When the state of emergency ended and they were released from detention, they continued to be the leaders. And so the leadership was male.
A number of the frontline sisters were not satisfied that the women were being given enough opportunity to lead. And that caused some problems at some point. Right? And it was a difficult period for us. It was a difficult period, particularly for the leadership in NJAC. Some of them were very chauvinistic. There's no way around that. Some of them were. And it led to confrontations, I remember, at the leadership between some of them and some of us. And the question of what sisters were capable of handling.
I was always one of the troublesome women. I always felt that, it was a tight family thing. So people would try to see what relationships you had and that kind of thing. And I remember once being challenged as to a relationship. I stopped one relationship and began another. And the brother that I broke off with complained to the organization, and they called a meeting to sanction me. And I went to the meeting, and I told them in Trumpian language that I was responsible for my own body, and I gave no credence to this body to even question or sanction. So I had those wars. Makeup and stuff was frowned upon. I said, I'm an African woman. Makeup was discovered on the banks of the Nile. I'm not any blue-clad female Chinese worker. I'm an African woman. So he got it flaunted. So I was always up in everybody's face kind of woman. And I think I had their respect. I had confrontations. But I always stood up and handled myself. Although women did the same work in every area of the struggle, but the men were very much in charge. And I didn't let them.
There were the kind of confrontations that were taking place in the outer society where women were seeking to establish themselves in a particular way. And we had it in the organization. And just like in the other society, men have had to step aside and allow it to happen.
You know what I find interesting about these women is that they believed in themselves. And I think they believe in the cause, and they were willing to stand up for it. And that means standing up for a cause in the face of ridicule.
Being a member of NJAC and saying that you are part of a struggle to change the society that gave you so much, and the PNM government, and being anti-PNM and all that, and to say that Eric Williams must go, and the government must be overthrown, and the government must move out, and so on, was not a good thing. Didn't help you. It created a lot of tension all around.
My second wife told me that on one occasion, they put so much pressure on her uncle where she was staying that she had to leave the house and seek refuge elsewhere.
One had to find a way of managing relationships living literally in the same house with people who did not share the fact, who felt that you were letting down the family, who felt that this was an era of social mobility. And so I was the first to get a degree. As I said, my sister came soon after me. I was the first to get a degree. It meant something to my father. And I was not living up to his expectations of the quality of life that I should have brought to the family. Having gained this degree and coming back into the family, I was not meeting the expectations of my family.
I don't think people understand how they maintain themselves all these years and maintain their consciousness for changing the country.
Very often I know people ask, are you all still active and so on? You don't stop a movement. What we did in 1970, we raised the consciousness of people throughout. And once people's consciousness is raised, there is no stopping. There will be years and decades after, and you will hear a pop-up and a pop-up if the organization does not continue. But that basic education, that is so important. As my husband said once, he said, this was the first national school. And it was like a school in motion, because every day the demonstrations were led to another area. And they were speaking, and beside the speaking on the platform, the amount of conversations, there was a whole rapport within the actual movement, the demonstration. People start talking about one topic and that, or we would listen to the speech and then people raise, yes, and expound more upon the topic. For example, be a brother, be a sister. People do not understand how profound that is and how much that changed our society. But what he went on to explain and how people interpreted afterwards, the role of the woman, the role of one sex towards the other, how one should be treating the other, how we should be treating the elders, how we should raise our children. It was not just that we were speaking about the economic factors or the social, as they were very important, but people were being transformed. And this is why it was so difficult. A state of emergency could not stop that growth.
There has been a concerted effort, in my opinion, to almost act as if something never happened.
We don't talk about it. My nieces and nephews and their children know very little about it. And part of it is our fault, our generation, because we don't talk about, we don't share that information, or we don't do it enough, and we don't do it in a manner that it's historical. It's something to be proud of. Yes, there was bloodshed. Yes, there were all kinds of things. There was the state of emergency. We had that state of emergency.
You don't have to sugarcoat it. You don't have to over-glorify it. But you must know what happened and how the society evolved. 1970 was critical. 1970 was crucial. 1970 almost brought down the government.
I get angry because of the silence. But when I sit back and think about the silence, there might have been so much pain that occurred during that time that people have just buried it.
Remember, the people who were involved were revolutionaries. And remember that the Statute of Liberty, of limitation, still holds. So there's a lot that people will not and cannot say.
Did we take over the country? Did we overthrow the PNM government? No. But were we successful? Yes. You know? we did a lot in terms of sensitization of, first of all, ourselves as people, where we stood, that of the role of the white social order, and what it did for us in terms of our awareness of who we are.
We all should embrace who we are. So who am I? I'm a Black Trinidadian woman who have experienced lots of things in this country and beyond. But I'm proud of each one of those things that I've experienced has shaped who I am as a woman today. And at the root of it all is I'm a Black Trinidadian woman.
These women resonate like that throughout our society because they remind women of the fact that they have a right to this space. It is a feminist activism tinged with this Black power, post-colonial, really interesting mix that is really a product of this time and this particular space.
Now we reach to the point where we all have to come together. Celebrate if you're great, that we come and big up the future. There's a powerful message in here with a silver lining. There's a dream that we have, that we stand up and do some shining. Hey, we are the light of the Caribbean, we rising high. And everybody we look out for, I and I. It's just a one love we embracing, nice and tight. And everybody getting love right here tonight. I'm the shining Caribbean light. We are the light of the Caribbean, we rising high. And everybody we look out for, I and I. It's just a one love we embracing, nice and tight. And everybody getting love right here tonight. I'm the shining Caribbean light. We are the light of the Caribbean, we rising high. And everybody we look out for, I and I. It's just a one love we embracing, nice and tight. And everybody getting love right here tonight. I'm the shining Caribbean light. We are the light of the Caribbean, we rising high. And everybody we look out for, I and I. It's just a one love we embracing, nice and tight. And everybody getting love right here tonight. I'm the shining Caribbean light.